Have you ever felt like the moment you start noticing more, life becomes heavier instead of lighter? Imagine this. You wake up one morning, the sky's still a deep indigo, the world not yet noisy. You look around, and something inside you clicks. You see connections between things most people overlook. A subtle rhythm in the way people rush through their lives, the way decisions are made, the way silence carries more truth than words. It feels like clarity, but strangely, it doesn't make you feel closer to people. It pushes you a little further away. That's the burden of seeing too clearly. You begin to realize that the sharper your vision, the more isolated you become. Now, before we wander deeper, let me give you this small invitation. Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace, and if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. And just so you know, you probably won't hear this in your average classroom lecture. Some of the greatest minds in history weren't destroyed by ignorance itself, but by the heavy silence of people who refused to listen. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together. You've heard the phrase ignorance is bliss, right? At first, it sounds cliche, almost like a bumper sticker for people who don't want to read too much into things. But when you live with a mind that catches everything, you start realizing there's a darker twist to it. Ignorance doesn't just protect the ignorant, it isolates the observer. Because once you notice cracks in the walls of society, you can't unsee them. And here you are, noticing those cracks, while everyone else is admiring the paint. The tricky part is that you don't set out to be different. You're not sitting in your room plotting, I want to outthink the entire crowd today. It just happens. You catch patterns without meaning to. A sentence someone says slips into your memory, and 3 weeks later, you connect it to a headline in a way that seems obvious to you, but impossible to them. And when you try to share it, they look at you as if you've just offered them instructions for building a spaceship out of garden hoses. This is the curse wrapped inside the gift. You get to see further down the road, but you also get to walk it mostly alone. And let's be honest, walking ahead of the crowd doesn't feel like victory. It feels like waiting at a bus stop where no one else shows up. You're holding a ticket, but the bus hasn't even been invented yet. Think about Nikola Tesla for a second. He imagined a world powered by free wireless energy when people were still cranking hand-cranked phonographs. He saw not just where technology was, but where it could be decades later. That kind of vision is exhilarating if you're the one seeing it. But to the people around him, it was unsettling. It was like watching someone pull back a curtain you didn't even know existed. And here's the awkward truth. When people feel unsettled, they don't say thank you. They back away. They laugh. Or worse, they dismiss. You've probably noticed this in small ways in your own life. You're in a group and you bring up an idea that's a little too complex, a little too far beyond the casual chatter. Instead of leaning in, people give you that polite nod, the one that says, we're not going there. And then someone quickly changes the subject back to weather or sports. It's not that they dislike you, it's that your thought forced them to confront something they weren't ready for. This is the burden of clarity, not that you're wrong, but that you're early. And being early is almost indistinguishable from being invisible. You see a storm forming on the horizon while everyone else is still enjoying the sunshine. You warn them, and they laugh because the sky looks clear. Only when the first drops fall do they realize, but by then, they rarely remember who told them first. Here's the odd comfort in this. You're not alone in the loneliness. History is littered with minds that carried too much light for their time. Socrates was condemned for asking too many uncomfortable questions. Galileo was forced to deny what he knew about the stars. Ada Lovelace saw the future of computing when people were still sketching mechanical gears, and what they all carried was the same heavy truth. You can't rush society to see what it refuses to see. Yet, there's also a strange sort of beauty in this role. Imagine yourself in a dimly lit cave. Most people are content with the fire flickering against the wall. You, however, notice that faint glow coming from deeper inside. You wander, torch in hand, down the twisting path. It's darker, lonelier, but then the tunnel opens, and suddenly you're standing in a chamber filled with crystals reflecting infinite light. You know it's real. You've seen it. But when you run back to tell the others, they squint at you as if you've just made it up. Do you stop seeing because they don't believe? Or do you keep walking toward the light, even if no one follows? That's the real choice you face when you carry vision. And let's add a little humor here, because otherwise it sounds too heavy. Being ahead of your time is basically like being the first person to try sushi in a town that thinks raw fish is bait. At first, everyone gags and calls you weird. 10 years later, the same people are lining up at trendy fusion restaurants saying, "I've always loved sushi." You just smile and say nothing, because what's the point of reminding them? That's the game geniuses play with history. Their clarity gets mocked in the moment, then praised decades later, often after they're gone. Which means the real burden isn't just seeing clearly, it's surviving long enough to watch the world finally catch up. And that brings us to the question you can't shake. Is it better to keep quiet, to blend in, to dull your vision so others don't feel uncomfortable? Or is it worth carrying the weight, knowing it might isolate you, but also knowing it makes you part of a rare lineage of people who saw the world not just as it was, but as it could be? That restless tension between silence and speech, between belonging and truth, is the heartbeat of why society ignores true geniuses. And as your mind drifts with that thought, you'll see how this weight doesn't just come from the clarity itself, but from the way groups cling to comfort. That shift in energy leads us straight into something else. You've probably noticed how people cling to what feels safe, even when safe doesn't equal true. Picture a group sitting around a campfire thousands of years ago. The fire is warm, the shadows feel manageable, and nobody wants to talk about the possibility of a predator lurking just outside the glow. Why? Because acknowledging it would mean disrupting the fragile sense of security. And you already know this. Human beings are addicted to comfort, even if it costs them progress. That's why society resists disruptive truths. It's not that the truth itself is unbelievable, it's that the truth threatens stability. You can see this play out over and over, whether it's Galileo daring to say the Earth isn't the center of the universe, or Tesla claiming energy could be harnessed in ways that made oil barons very nervous. To the average person, it's not just science or philosophy, it's shaking the ground they've built their lives on. People would rather keep a shaky illusion intact than face a reality that forces them to rethink everything. You know this feeling on a smaller scale. Maybe you've tried to tell a friend something they didn't want to hear, like how their relationship isn't as healthy as they pretend, or how their job is draining them more than they admit. Instead of thanking you, they get defensive. They shut down, even lash out. Why? Because your words threatened their comfort zone, and comfort zones are guarded more fiercely than fortresses. Here's the paradox. Comfort feels safe, but it also chains you, and society as a collective acts the same way individuals do. We cling to old beliefs like a threadbare blanket, afraid of the cold air that new ideas might bring. Even if that blanket is full of holes, we hold on to it as though letting go would mean losing everything. Let's laugh at this for a second. Imagine if your phone worked the same way society does. You try to update it, but your phone resists because it doesn't want to disrupt its comfort zone. It insists on keeping its ancient version of the software because it feels safe there. Meanwhile, you're stuck with apps crashing, battery draining, and emojis that look like ancient cave paintings. That's society in a nutshell, clinging to outdated systems, even when the update could actually fix everything. This resistance isn't random, it's rooted in psychology. People crave certainty. Certainty feels like survival. Change, even if it's good, feels like danger. That's why someone like Tesla wasn't just ignored, he was actively resisted. Free wireless energy sounds incredible now, but back then it threatened entire industries. Oil tycoons, financiers, and governments weren't about to embrace a technology that made their fortunes irrelevant. Better to call him crazy than to admit he was right. And this isn't just history. You see it every day. Take climate change. Scientists shout from the rooftops, data piles up, storms get worse, but still many cling to denial. Not because the evidence isn't convincing, but because the implications are terrifying. Admitting it means rethinking lifestyles, economies, entire systems. So, society plugs its ears and hums loudly, hoping the storm will magically pass. What you're really noticing here is how comfort acts like a sedative. It dulls awareness. It whispers, "Don't worry about it. Things are fine," even when the house is literally on fire. And the moment someone like Turing or Tesla steps forward with a fire alarm, the crowd doesn't thank them. It shushes them, because silence feels safer than alarm bells. But here's the kicker: comfort isn't neutral. By choosing comfort, society isn't standing still, it's falling behind. Every ignored truth, every silenced genius, every dismissed idea pushes the future further away. You can almost picture history as a long hallway lined with doors. Behind each door is an invention, a discovery, a breakthrough. The keys are handed to visionaries, but more often than not, the crowd snatches the key away and hides it because opening the door feels scary. And so the hallway stretches longer and progress limps instead of leaps. And you've probably felt this in your own life too. Maybe you've had moments where you wanted to change, start something new, break an old habit, chase an idea that felt impossible. And yet, you stayed in the comfort zone, not because the idea was bad, but because the uncertainty felt too sharp. You see how personal this is? The same psychology that keeps you stuck sometimes is the same psychology that keeps society from embracing its visionaries. That's why geniuses aren't just ignored, they're resisted. Because to listen to them means to admit we've been wrong, to admit the ground we've built on is shakier than we thought. And no one likes to feel foolish. It's easier to scoff, easier to call someone eccentric or delusional than to admit they might be right and we might have to change everything. Let's slip in a playful jab here. Society has the same stubbornness as that one relative who refuses to use GPS. They'd rather drive in circles for hours than admit they're lost. And when you finally point out they missed the turn 15 miles ago, they snap, "I meant to do that." That's human nature, pride over progress. But here's where the story gets more interesting. Once you realize that this resistance isn't about truth itself, but about the fear of losing comfort, you can predict how people will react to new ideas. The sharper the truth, the more it threatens the illusion, the stronger the resistance. Which means the greatest visionaries aren't just teachers, they're disruptors of comfort. And society doesn't clap for disruptors, not at first. That quiet truth is what makes the burden of clarity heavier. You're not only carrying what you see, you're carrying the weight of everyone else's refusal to see. And that resistance creates something you've probably felt before: the strange tension when someone else's brilliance shines too brightly. That tension has a name, and it leads us straight into the next layer of the puzzle. You've been in that moment, haven't you? Someone walks into the room, speaks with an ease you don't have, or solves a problem faster than you thought possible, and something stirs inside you. It's not admiration, not entirely. It's uncomfortable. You feel exposed, as if their brilliance is holding up a mirror you didn't ask to look into. That's the mirror effect of intellect, and it's one of the deepest reasons society ignores its geniuses. Here's how it works. When you stand next to someone physically strong, you admire their muscles, maybe even ask about their workout routine. When you meet someone wealthy, you might feel envy, sure, but you also know their wealth doesn't directly threaten your own identity. But when someone demonstrates a level of intelligence or insight that goes far beyond yours, something else kicks in. It's as though their clarity casts a shadow over your own mind, making you question your worth, your relevance, even your very place in the conversation. That discomfort doesn't inspire most people, it triggers defensiveness. Think about Alan Turing. He cracked codes in World War II that entire armies couldn't break, using a machine that would eventually become the ancestor of the computer you're listening on right now. Did society celebrate him as a hero? Briefly. But soon the mirror effect turned harsh. His genius highlighted not just how brilliant he was, but how blind and rigid the system around him was. Instead of embracing him, they punished him, as if silencing him would silence the reflection he created. This is what people do when they feel small next to a mind that's too big. They don't say, "Wow, how can I learn from you?" They say, "You must be odd, dangerous, or wrong." It's easier to dismiss a reflection than to sit with the uncomfortable truth it shows. You've seen this play out in smaller ways too. Maybe you've shared an idea at work or in class, something a bit sharper than the usual chatter. Instead of excitement, you get silence, or worse, that sideways glance that says, "Who do you think you are?" That's not about your idea being bad. It's about your idea being too good, too sharp, too reflective. It revealed something others didn't want to see about themselves. And let's lighten the mood for a second. This is why some people absolutely hate trivia nights. There's always that one person who knows the capital of some obscure island nation or the chemical symbol for tungsten. And instead of everyone saying, "Wow, thanks for teaching us," you get groans and muttered, "Show off." The mirror effect isn't about the facts, it's about the reflection. People don't like realizing how much they don't know. Psychologists will tell you this boils down to identity. People build their sense of self around competence, believing they're smart enough, capable enough, informed enough. When someone comes along whose brilliance blows that illusion apart, the brain panics. Instead of saying, "Great, I'll expand my sense of self," it scrambles to protect the fragile ego. The easiest way? Reject the genius. Ignore them, mock them. Treat them as if their brilliance is an odd quirk instead of a valuable gift. And this explains why geniuses often describe their lives as lonely. It's not that they dislike people. It's that people struggle to stand in the reflection of their mind without flinching. Imagine holding up a mirror that shows everyone their unbrushed hair, their crooked tie, the smudge on their face. Do they thank you for the clarity? No, they get annoyed at you for holding the mirror at all. That's what Tesla and Turing experienced on a massive scale. Now here's the twist. The mirror effect doesn't just make others defensive, it makes geniuses themselves second guess. Tesla died alone, feeding pigeons in New York, wondering if his life had been wasted. Turing, despite having reshaped the future, endured punishment so brutal it broke him. When society rejects your reflection long enough, even you start wondering if your mirror is broken. That's the cruelest irony of all, that the sharpest minds sometimes lose faith not in others, but in themselves. And you can feel this echo in your own quieter struggles. You've had insights, haven't you? You've noticed patterns or solutions that no one else seemed to see. And when you tried to share them, you were brushed off, maybe even laughed at. In those moments, a part of you wondered if you were wrong. But here's the secret. Often, you weren't wrong. You were just early. Your mirror was too sharp for the room you were in. Let's pause and chuckle here. Being ahead of your time is like showing up at a Halloween party in full costume, only to realize nobody else dressed up. You stand there with fake fangs and a cape, while everyone else sips punch in jeans. Do you look ridiculous? Maybe in the moment. But when the invitations are checked again, it turns out you were the only one who actually read them. That's the genius experience in a nutshell. Misunderstood at the party, validated by history. The mirror effect also explains why society celebrates geniuses only after they're gone. When Tesla was alive, he was seen as eccentric, even unstable. After his death, his reflections became safe. They could admire his brilliance without feeling personally exposed. Same with Turing. Ignored, punished, and humiliated in his lifetime, then decades later hailed as a hero and awarded posthumous apologies. Why? Because dead mirrors don't make people uncomfortable. The reflection is historical, not personal. And here's the deeper tragedy. You can't help but wonder how many breakthroughs humanity has lost because of this reflex. How many ideas were silenced, how many inventions buried, how many insights smothered, not because they were wrong, but because they reflected too much truth too soon. You see, the mirror affect isn't just a quirk of human psychology. It's a mechanism that shapes history itself. But there's something else here too, something that makes this whole picture even stranger. Because society doesn't just ignore geniuses, they often swing wildly from admiration to resentment. At first, brilliance is entertaining, almost like a novelty. But the moment it starts to challenge the comfort zone, admiration twists into rejection. And that strange shift leads us right into the next part of the journey. It starts innocently enough. Society loves novelty. A clever invention, a quirky demonstration, an eccentric genius who sparks curiosity. These things draw applause at first. You've seen how the crowd reacts when someone shows them something shiny and harmless. They laugh, they cheer, they clap. Genius, in its early stage, is entertaining. Tesla lighting up a room with wireless bulbs? Fascinating. Turing talking about machines that could think? Intriguing. People lean in when it feels like a magic trick. But something subtle happens when that same genius shifts from entertaining to threatening. The admiration curdles. The applause dies down. People start whispering instead of cheering. What was once celebrated as brilliance is suddenly treated as arrogance or danger. This shift from admiration to resentment is one of the strangest patterns you'll notice in how society treats its brightest minds. Here's why. Admiration works only as long as the genius stays within the boundaries of the familiar. Tesla demonstrating electricity? Amazing. Tesla suggesting he could power the world for free and dismantle entire industries? Terrifying. Turing building code-breaking machines? Heroic. Turing suggesting machines might outthink humans one day? Disturbing. The line between celebration and rejection is razor thin, and the moment brilliance crosses it, people recoil. You've probably felt echoes of this in your own life. When you do something impressive but contained, maybe a clever idea at work or a unique perspective in a conversation, people smile, nod, and call you insightful. But if you push further, challenge assumptions, or expose flaws in the very system they depend on, suddenly the mood shifts. The same people who applauded you now feel threatened. It's not that they stopped respecting you, it's that your insight became inconvenient. And let's slip in a bit of humor, because otherwise it sounds too bleak. This is kind of like when you tell a friend they should try a new restaurant and they thank you for the suggestion. But when you tell them maybe they should rethink their entire diet, suddenly you're judgmental. Small insights? Welcome. Big truths? Uninvited. That's society in a nutshell. History is packed with this pattern. Look at Galileo. His telescope wowed people when it revealed stunning views of the heavens. But the moment he declared that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, admiration snapped into hostility. The church, which had politely tolerated him, suddenly dragged him into trial. Why? Because he shifted from entertainer to challenger. The same thing happened to Tesla. Investors loved his dazzling demonstrations. They loved the electricity arcing through the air, the spectacle of bulbs lighting with no wires. But when he started talking about transmitting power freely across the globe, the people with money suddenly grew cold. Free power meant no profits, and no profits meant Tesla wasn't just eccentric, he was dangerous. They didn't want free light, they wanted controlled light, metered and billable. And so, admiration turned into quiet sabotage. This strange shift isn't just about economics or institutions, it's deeply psychological. People love to admire brilliance when it doesn't demand change from them. Genius is like a pet tiger in a cage, exciting, exotic, safe to look at. But once that cage door looks like it might open, admiration evaporates. Suddenly, what was awe-inspiring becomes terrifying. People don't want to deal with what brilliance implies, that their world, their beliefs, their habits might have to change. And this creates a cruel irony. Geniuses often mistake early applause for acceptance. They think, finally, people understand. But what they don't realize is that the applause is conditional. It lasts only as long as they entertain, not disrupt. The moment they begin to stretch too far, the crowd turns, and the same voices that once cheered them will mutter, "Who does this person think they are?" You've probably felt a tiny version of this too. Maybe you were praised for your talent, your creativity, your problem solving, your perspective. But when you tried to apply it in a way that actually changed the rules, suddenly it wasn't charming anymore. Suddenly you were too much. This is how admiration works. It flatters until it feels threatened, and then it flips into resentment. It's worth laughing at how predictable this is. Society treats geniuses like smartphones. People love them when they're shiny and new, but the second they get complicated, confusing, or start making people feel out of date, suddenly everyone groans and says, "Ugh, do we really need this?" And then, years later, the very same features they resisted become indispensable. But here's the deeper tragedy. This shift from admiration to resentment doesn't just bruise egos, it erodes lives. Tesla ended his days bankrupt, his inventions sabotaged or stolen, reduced to a cautionary tale of eccentric genius. Turing endured persecution so severe it broke him. despite having saved millions of lives. These aren't just stories of ignored brilliance, they're stories of brilliance punished for being inconvenient. And yet, the cycle repeats. Again and again, society treats its visionaries like weather balloons, celebrated as long as they stay high and harmless, despised once they drift too close to the ground where real lives might be altered. It makes you wonder, if we know this pattern, why do we keep repeating it? The answer lies in the very human fear of losing comfort, but also in something else, the loneliness that comes from standing apart. Because once admiration curdles into resentment, the genius is left standing alone, surrounded not by applause, but by silence. And that silence, heavy and unrelenting, carries us into the next truth. Picture yourself walking through a crowded street at night. The air is buzzing with chatter, laughter, music spilling out of cafes. But inside, you feel like you're on a different frequency altogether, like a radio tuned to a station no one else can hear. That's what it feels like to be an outlier, to see decades ahead while everyone else is still squinting at the present. The loneliness of the outlier isn't just being misunderstood. It's being perpetually early, so early that your voice echoes in empty rooms. You've probably felt a trace of this yourself. Maybe you had an idea that seemed obvious to you, a solution that practically glowed in your mind. But when you shared it, the people around you shrugged, dismissed it, or didn't even understand the words you were using. You walk away thinking, was it me? But deep down, you know it wasn't. It was that they weren't ready, and being early is one of the loneliest places to stand. Look at Tesla again. He was building prototypes for wireless energy, experimenting with transmitting power across distances, while most people were still struggling to keep their homes lit with oil lamps. He saw the future shimmering in front of him, but no one else could. Imagine carrying that inside you, the certainty of what could exist, paired with the emptiness of no one else seeing it. It's not just frustrating, it's isolating. Or consider Alan Turing. He cracked codes no one else could touch, effectively shortening a war and saving millions of lives. Yet outside of that small circle who knew his work, he walked the streets unrecognized, even mistrusted. Later, when his identity clashed with societal norms, that loneliness sharpened into cruelty. He knew he had contributed more to humanity than most ever would, and still he lived as if carrying a secret no one wanted to honor. That's the paradox of the outlier. You give the world everything, but the world gives you silence. There's a strange sort of beauty in this loneliness, though. It's not just emptiness, it's also clarity. When you're standing far enough ahead, you see landscapes others can't yet imagine. You notice connections, possibilities, dangers, opportunities. It's like standing on a mountain ridge while everyone else is still climbing through fog at the base. You want to shout down, the view is worth it, but your words don't travel. And so you sit with the silence, waiting for them to arrive. Let's toss in a little humor before this gets too heavy. Being an outlier is like showing up to a costume party in full medieval armor, only to realize everyone else thought costume meant a silly hat. You clang around with your sword and shield while they're sipping drinks and giggling at their plastic tiaras. Do you look out of place? Absolutely. But when someone eventually suggests a jousting tournament, guess who's suddenly the most prepared? That's the outlier life. You look absurd until suddenly you don't. Still, the loneliness can gnaw at you. Many geniuses describe feeling as though they lived in two worlds at once, the world of their contemporaries and the world of their visions. And that double existence is exhausting. One part of you has to play along, smile politely, nod at conversations about weather and gossip. The other part is racing ahead, building cathedrals of thought, solving puzzles no one else even knows exist. You carry both realities, but only one gets acknowledged. And here's where it gets even heavier. The loneliness of the outlier often leads to self-doubt. When you spend years unheard, you start questioning whether your vision is real. Tesla wrote letters filled with both confidence and despair. Turing struggled with depression that stemmed not from failure, but from being unseen. Even geniuses aren't immune to the human need for validation. They may not need applause, but they need at least one person to say, "I see what you see." Without that, the weight becomes unbearable. You might have noticed how this plays out in your own quieter corners of life. Maybe you've tried to explain a dream, an idea, or a project to someone, only to be met with blank stares. And in that silence, you felt the tiniest pang of doubt, wondering if maybe you were imagining things. That's the loneliness talking. It's not proof you're wrong, it's proof you're standing further ahead than they can yet walk. And society, for all its progress, still struggles to hold space for its outliers. We idolize geniuses only after time has softened their edges. Once their ideas become familiar, once they're safe, only then do we celebrate them. Einstein, mocked in his early years, is now plastered on posters. Van Gogh, who sold almost no paintings in his lifetime, now hangs in every museum gift shop. It's as if society says, "We'll love you once you're no longer here to unsettle us." But while they lived, silence, loneliness, outlierhood. Let's chuckle again, because we need balance. Society is basically like that one friend who texts you back 3 years late. You send an idea, they ignore it, and then years later they reply, "Wow, this is amazing." By then, you've moved on. The joke's old. But hey, at least they noticed, right? History works the same way. And so, the loneliness of the outlier becomes not just a personal struggle, but a societal loss. Because every moment a genius spends in silence is a moment their work could have been amplified, supported, expanded. Instead, they trudge forward alone, carrying a vision that could have reshaped the present, but will only be recognized in the future. That silence, that isolation, is not random. It's the result of patterns, of repeated resistance, of choices society makes again and again. And as your thoughts linger on this loneliness, you start to see how the story sharpens when you look closely at specific lives, like Tesla's, whose silent experiments revealed just how much the world refused to see. And that leads us gently forward. Close your eyes for a moment and picture a dimly lit workshop, the kind cluttered with coils of copper wire, strange humming contraptions, and scraps of paper filled with sketches that look more like science fiction than science. In the middle of that chaos stands Nikola Tesla, moving quietly, almost reverently, as if he's listening to something only he can hear. His experiments weren't just science, they were whispers from the future, flickers of possibilities too bold for his own time. Tesla's life was one long duel between vision and resistance. He imagined towers that could beam energy wirelessly across continents, electricity streaming through the air like invisible rivers. He saw a planet where energy flowed freely, where every household could have light without bills, without wires, without limitation. You can almost feel the goosebumps when you think of it, standing in a room where bulbs glow in your hands without being plugged into anything. That was Tesla's reality, and yet, to everyone else, it was madness. At first, people admired him. He was a showman as much as a scientist, dazzling crowds with demonstrations that looked like sorcery. Sparks flying, lights glowing, currents dancing through his fingertips. It was entertainment with a twist of awe. But remember that strange shift we talked about? Admiration flips the moment genius threatens comfort, and Tesla's brilliance threatened the most powerful comfort of all, money. Investors loved Tesla when he built machines that could be patented, controlled, sold. But when he unveiled ideas that suggested energy could be free, the applause turned cold. J.P. Morgan, one of his key backers, pulled away when he realized Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower wasn't just about communication, it was about transmitting power wirelessly. Free power. No meters, no profits. And so, the dream was cut off at its roots. The tower stood unfinished, a monument to vision strangled by greed. Imagine what it felt like to stand in front of that tower, knowing what it could do, feeling the certainty of your own genius, and watching as the world turned its back. That's the loneliness of Tesla's silent experiments. He wasn't wrong. He wasn't delusional. He was simply unwelcome, and so he retreated further into his workshop, tinkering in solitude, his notebooks filling with ideas so far ahead that some are still only now being rediscovered. Here's where the humor creeps in. Tesla was so eccentric that people often dismissed him as odd, which made it easier to ignore his brilliance. He once claimed to communicate with pigeons, describing one in particular as his companion, even saying he loved her. Society laughed, as if a man who could dream of wireless energy couldn't also feel affection for a bird. But think about it. When you've been silenced and abandoned, sometimes the only creature who listens is the one with wings. And yet, even in his isolation, Tesla kept dreaming. He spoke of harnessing the energy of the earth itself, of creating machines that could eliminate labor, of connecting humanity in ways that sound eerily like the internet. You're living in Tesla's shadow every time you flip a switch, charge your phone, or send a signal through the air. His fingerprints are everywhere, even though in his lifetime he died poor feeding pigeons in New York hotels. That's the paradox of Tesla, a man who gave light to the world, left to fade in darkness himself. You've probably had a tiny taste of this too. You try something new, something bold, and people dismiss it because it's too weird. Maybe you doodled an invention, pitched an idea, or even just suggested a different way of doing things, and the room went silent. You weren't wrong. You were just unwelcome. Tesla lived that silence at a scale you can barely imagine. And here's what makes his story cut even deeper. We'll never truly know how much progress humanity lost because of that resistance. What if Wardenclyffe Tower had been completed? What if wireless energy had been embraced instead of suppressed? What if Tesla's experiments hadn't been dismissed as eccentricities, but developed as breakthroughs? The answers hang like ghosts over history. Possibilities locked away, progress delayed, all because vision collided with fear and greed. Let's laugh softly again, because even Tesla's quirks feel oddly human. He was obsessed with the number 3, often walking around a building 3 times before entering. He hated pearls so much, he refused to speak to women who wore them. Imagine being so ahead of your time in science, yet so hilariously particular in daily life. It's almost comforting to know that even geniuses get stuck in their own rituals. But behind those quirks was pain. Tesla once said, "The present is theirs, the future, for which I have really worked, is mine." That line is both triumphant and heartbreaking. Triumphant because he knew his vision was real. Heartbreaking because he had to accept he would never live to see it recognized. His silent experiments were like messages in bottles tossed into the sea, waiting for a future that might one day open them. And here's where the silence of Tesla's life connects to the bigger theme. Geniuses don't just face resistance, they often create in a void, knowing their audience isn't their contemporaries, but generations yet to come. That's both noble and crushing. Noble, because it means they're working for humanity itself. Crushing, because it means they're often working alone. As you picture Tesla in his workshop, scribbling ideas while the rest of the world mocked or ignored him, you can feel the weight of what it means to carry vision. And yet, Tesla wasn't alone in this fate. Another man, decades later, would find himself equally ahead, equally ignored, and equally punished for being too different. And his name was Alan Turing, which is where our story drifts next. Now, let your mind drift to a different kind of workshop, not cluttered with coils and lightning sparks, but filled with chalkboards covered in equations, machines clicking and whirring, and a quiet man with sharp eyes who barely lifted his voice. Alan Turing didn't need spectacle. His brilliance wasn't in dazzling crowds with sparks of electricity, but in bending logic itself, in seeing patterns in chaos where everyone else saw nothing. If Tesla gave light to the world, Turing gave it language, teaching machines how to think. During World War II, while bombs shattered cities and nations trembled, Turing sat in Bletchley Park, staring at encrypted messages churned out by the Enigma machine. To most, the codes were an unsolvable riddle, a storm of meaningless letters. To Turing, they were puzzles waiting for the right key. He built a machine, a giant of rotating drums and wires, that could sift through endless combinations at lightning speed. That machine cracked the uncrackable. Historians estimate it shortened the war by years and saved millions of lives. Millions. And yet, step back and ask yourself, how did society repay him? With medals, parades, endless gratitude? No. His work was buried under secrecy, his name whispered only in classified files. While others who fought on battlefields were hailed as heroes, Turing was left in the shadows, his victory sealed away by silence. It's as though he saved the world only to be told, "Don't tell anyone." The mirror affect hit Turing hard, too. His genius reflected not only the flaws in German codes, but also the flaws in British society. because Turing was gay at a time when being gay was treated as a crime. The very man who had saved the nation was soon prosecuted by the same nation, forced into chemical castration as punishment for his identity. Imagine that. Brilliance beyond measure, service beyond comparison, met with cruelty beyond reason. His story is one of the most brutal examples of how society not only ignores geniuses, but sometimes actively destroys them. And here's where the irony twists even sharper. Turing didn't just help end a war. He also laid the groundwork for modern computing. The phone in your pocket, the screen you're staring at now, the algorithms humming quietly in the background of your life, all of it traces back to Turing's idea of a universal machine. He imagined it decades before it became real. But during his lifetime, people saw him less as a visionary and more as a problem, someone whose identity was too unsettling to fit their comfort zone. You can almost feel the heartbreak of it. Imagine holding inside your mind the blueprint for the digital age, knowing your ideas could transform everything, and yet being told you weren't even fit to live freely. The loneliness Tesla felt in his workshop echoes here too. But with an added cruelty, Tesla was ignored, Turing was punished. Let's bring in a touch of humor here, because even Turing, like all geniuses, had his quirks. He was a terrible bicyclist. Legend says his bike chain was always slipping, but instead of fixing it, he just timed his pedaling to the chain's rhythm. Picture that, one of the sharpest minds in history, casually adapting to a faulty bike, as if the laws of mechanics were just another puzzle to adjust around. Genius, yes, but also hilariously human. And yet, beneath those quirks was a man who carried unbearable weight. Turing once asked, almost plaintively, "Can machines think?" That question now drives entire fields of research, from artificial intelligence to quantum computing. But in his time, it sounded absurd, even laughable. He was mocked for it, sidelined, treated as if he were too strange to be taken seriously. It's easy now, with hindsight, to see him as prophetic. But for him, in that moment, it was just another silence, another room of people who didn't understand. This silence grew darker as his trial and punishment unfolded. In 1954, Turing was found dead, an apple laced with cyanide at his bedside. Some say it was suicide. Others wonder if it was an accident from his experiments. Either way, the message is clear. The man who saved millions was abandoned by the very society he saved. And here's where you have to pause and let the weight sink in. Because Turing's story isn't just about one man, it's about a pattern. It's the same pattern you saw with Tesla, with Galileo, with countless others. Brilliance arrives too soon, too bright, too unsettling. At first it sparks curiosity, then discomfort, then rejection. And in Turing's case, rejection turned deadly. You've probably felt echoes of this too, though in smaller ways. Maybe you've asked a question in class or at work that made others squirm. Maybe you've been told you were thinking too much or overcomplicating things. Those phrases are softer versions of the same reflex, the attempt to silence vision because it makes people uncomfortable. Multiply that by 1,000, and you begin to glimpse Turing's life. Let's laugh again, gently, because even in tragedy, there's room for humanity. Imagine Turing walking into a modern Apple store. And yes, the bitten apple has often been linked, symbolically or coincidentally, to him. He'd probably chuckle at the sleek machines, poke around with a smirk, and mutter, "I told you so." And yet, he'd still be an outsider in his own age, because that's what happens when you're too far ahead. So as you think of Turing's quiet genius, his machine humming in Bletchley Park, his ideas echoing through time, you begin to see the bigger picture. Tesla's silence, Turing's suffering, Galileo's trial, Socrates' death, it's not random, it's a pattern. A recurring, almost ritual cycle where society suppresses its visionaries until it's safe, until enough time has passed for their brilliance to be admired without discomfort. That's the pattern of suppression, the next layer of the story, and it's where our thoughts are drifting next. Close your eyes and imagine history not as a straight line, but as a loop, a rhythm that repeats itself over and over like the beat of a drum. Each time a visionary appears, the cycle begins again. Discovery, resistance, ridicule, silence, then, only much later, recognition. This is the pattern of suppression, and once you notice it, you can't unsee it. It stretches from the ancient philosophers to the modern scientists, from Tesla's lonely experiments to Turing's tragic silence. The cycle isn't accidental. It's the way society protects itself from disruption, even at the cost of progress. Think about Socrates. His crime was asking questions that forced people to confront contradictions in their beliefs. Instead of thanking him, Athens sentenced him to drink hemlock. His ideas only flourished after he was gone, immortalized by his students. Galileo? He dared to suggest that the Earth was not the center of the universe. At first, curiosity. Then, when the implications threatened the Church's worldview, suppression. He spent the end of his life under house arrest, peering through his telescope while forbidden to speak his truth. And the same centuries-old rhythm repeats. Tesla, silenced by investors who feared losing profit. Turing, condemned by a government he had saved. Van Gogh painting masterpieces that were ignored until after his death. Over and over, the story loops. Truth arrives, society resists, genius suffers, time passes, recognition arrives too late. You might wonder, why too late? Why does society always wait until its geniuses are gone before it celebrates them? Because death makes them safe. Once a visionary can no longer challenge the present, their ideas become history instead of disruption. It's easier to admire someone when they're no longer holding up a mirror to your flaws. A dead genius can't force you to change your life. They can only inspire you in hindsight. And you've seen this cycle in miniature too. Maybe in your own circles. A friend ignores your suggestion until someone else repeats it later, dressed up as their own idea, and suddenly it's brilliant. Or you introduce a new concept at work, it gets brushed aside, and months later, the exact same idea is applauded when conditions feel safer. Suppression doesn't always look like trials or imprisonment. Sometimes it's silence, delay, or the awkward shuffle of people pretending they didn't hear you the first time. Let's slip in a bit of humor here, because this pattern, while tragic, is also absurd. Society is basically like that student who refuses to do their homework until the night before it's due, then rushes to finish and acts like they've been preparing all along. Humanity waits until disaster strikes, then suddenly remembers the warnings it once ignored. It's procrastination on a civilizational scale. And yet, this procrastination comes at a cost. For every Tesla whose notebooks survive, how many others left no trace? For every Turing whose contributions are rediscovered, how many ideas were smothered completely? Think about the inventions, the cures, the breakthroughs that may have been lost forever because society dismissed their creators too soon. The pattern of suppression isn't just frustrating, it's tragic because it robs us of futures we could have had. This cycle also reveals something strange about time itself. Visionaries don't belong fully to their own era. They live half in the present, half in the future. Their ideas spill over, too advanced to be absorbed right away. And society, caught in the present, reacts with suspicion. Only later, when the world finally catches up, do those ideas find a home. But by then, the visionary is often long gone. It's as if the future itself keeps sending messengers, only for the present to cover its ears until the echo fades. And here's the kicker. You and I live inside this cycle right now. Somewhere today, there are minds working on ideas that seem outrageous, impossible, even laughable. People scoff at them, call them eccentric, dismiss their work as fantasy. And yet, decades from now, those same ideas might shape your daily life. Imagine the first person who suggested a handheld device could let you speak face-to-face with someone across the planet. Science fiction, they said. Now it's FaceTime. Imagine the first time someone suggested harnessing the atom, not just for destruction, but for energy. Terrifying, resisted, then reluctantly accepted. So the question becomes, are we any better at listening now? Or are we still trapped in the same cycle, destined to ignore today's Teslas and Turings until it's too late? And here's where it gets even more personal. Think about your own life. Have you ever felt like you were silencing yourself to fit in? Like your ideas were too much, so you kept them hidden, waiting for a safer time? That's suppression on the smallest scale. It's the same pattern, repeating in your daily choices. You become your own censor, stifling the very vision that could set you apart. Let's chuckle here, because you know it's true. Sometimes you've had a brilliant thought in the shower, only to dismiss it before breakfast, telling yourself it's silly. That's you playing the role of society against your own genius. You're both the visionary and the suppressor, all before you've even finished your morning coffee. The tragedy and the comedy of it all is that suppression feels safe in the moment but costs dearly in the long run. It keeps society comfortable but stagnant, individuals accepted but unfulfilled. And the more you notice it, the clearer it becomes that the cycle isn't just about history, it's about psychology. It's about fear, belonging, identity. And that question, why we fear our visionaries, opens the door to the next layer of the story. As your thoughts drift further, you start to see that the suppression of geniuses isn't just history repeating itself, it's psychology playing out in real time. The reason society fears its visionaries isn't because their ideas are wrong, but because their ideas threaten something far more fragile, the need to belong. You and I, everyone around you, we're wired for community. Belonging is survival. Thousands of years ago, being excluded from the tribe meant death. That instinct still lingers, whispering in our nervous systems, stay safe, stay normal, don't stand out too much. Now imagine what happens when someone like Tesla or Turing walks into the room. Their very presence cracks that illusion of normalcy. It's not that they swing their genius around like a sword, it's that their way of seeing reveals how narrow everyone else's vision has been. Psychologists call this the mirror effect. When you stand next to strength, you admire it. When you stand next to wealth, you envy it. But when you stand next to intellect, something else kicks in, insecurity. It feels personal, as if their brilliance exposes your inadequacy. And here's the uncomfortable truth. People don't usually resent what they don't understand. They resent what makes them feel exposed. A genius doesn't just present an idea, they present a reflection of how limited everyone else's thinking has been. That sting of inadequacy makes people defensive. It makes groups reject the very person they should protect. It happens in subtle ways, too. Think back to a time you offered a fresh perspective in a group, and instead of curiosity, you were met with silence or side eyes. Nobody shouted you down, but the message was clear: don't rock the boat. That's belonging whispering again. People prefer harmony over truth. And when harmony collides with genius, genius usually loses. This explains why society often chooses myths over facts, stability over growth. Change is frightening because it forces you to step outside the safety net of the group. If you believed the Earth was the center of the universe, you were part of the majority. Galileo disrupted not just science, but social cohesion. If Tesla had given the world free energy, entire industries, and the people whose lives depended on them would have collapsed. Progress, paradoxically, feels like a threat. Let's slip in some humor before it gets too heavy. Picture a caveman discovering fire, running back to the group, shouting, "Look, I made light," and the rest of the tribe squinting, muttering, "Yeah, but does it come in avocado green? Because if not, we're not interested." That's basically humanity's default reaction to change: minimize, deflect, resist. And it's not just society versus the genius, it's individuals wrestling within themselves. Every breakthrough idea carries an invisible cost. If you embrace it, you might lose belonging. Support Galileo, and suddenly you're suspected of heresy. Support Tesla, and you might lose your job in the energy industry. Support Turing, and you risk aligning with someone labeled criminal. Fear isn't just abstract, it's tied to very real consequences. This also explains the pattern of delay. Society doesn't reject genius forever, it just rejects it long enough to protect the illusion of safety. Once time has dulled the sting of discomfort, once the genius is no longer alive to challenge the group directly, then the idea becomes safe to celebrate. That's why Van Gogh's paintings sell for millions now, though he sold almost none in his life. That's why Turing is a national hero now, though he was condemned in his time. It's a posthumous bargain, recognition without disruption. And you can see the same psychology in everyday interactions. Think about fashion trends. The first person to wear something new gets laughed at. The 10th person gets side eyes. The 100th person? Suddenly it's cool. Genius works the same way. It needs critical mass before the group decides it's safe to embrace. Here's another laugh for you. Humans are basically like cats with cucumbers. The cucumber itself is harmless, even nutritious, but drop it into the wrong context and suddenly there's panic, leaping, scrambling. A new idea is just a cucumber on the floor of society's kitchen, startling at first, embraced later. And yet, there's a haunting question in all this. If belonging so often trumps truth, how do visionaries survive at all? How do they keep pushing forward when everything in society pushes back? Maybe that's what separates the ordinary from the extraordinary, not just the capacity to see differently, but the courage to endure isolation. Tesla fed pigeons. Turing tinkered with faulty bike chains. Van Gogh painted in poverty. Their resilience wasn't in being understood. It was in creating despite being ignored. But notice this too. Even when society suppresses visionaries, their ideas have a way of slipping through. You can suppress a person, but you can't suppress the future. Galileo's telescope was silenced, but the planets kept orbiting. Tesla's tower was torn down, but wireless energy still found its way into the world. Turing was punished, but the machines still learned to think. Ideas don't die, they wait. And waiting, as you've seen, is where the genius often suffers most. Which leads us to the final layer of this journey. If society resists, if belonging always fights against truth, then what do you do with that knowledge? Do you silence yourself to belong, or do you risk solitude to see clearly? That's the choice every visionary, and maybe even you, must face. And that's where our final drift takes us, into choosing to see anyway, even if it means standing alone. Here you are, standing at the edge of the story, and the question finally stares you down. What do you do with all this? You've wandered through centuries of resistance, through Tesla's pigeons and Turing's broken bike chain, through patterns of suppression and the psychology of belonging. And now the truth has settled in. You can't change the cycle of history all at once, but you can decide whether you'll be one of the people who covers their ears or one of the people who chooses to see anyway. Because seeing clearly will always cost you something. It might be comfort. It might be belonging. It might be the easy nod of agreement from a room full of people. But the alternative, living blind, silencing yourself, ignoring the spark inside, costs far more. Every time you quiet an idea to stay safe, you shrink a little. Every time you laugh off your own brilliance, you dim the very light that could brighten someone else's world. And maybe that's why society ignores geniuses, not just out of fear, but because it's easier than facing the uncomfortable reminder that all of us could dare to think more deeply, but most of us choose not to. You probably won't know this, but history's great shifts didn't begin with crowds. They began with one person sitting quietly, scribbling notes no one wanted to read. Tesla hunched over blueprints, the world indifferent. Turing pacing across chalkboards, the world suspicious. Galileo peering at the stars, the world hostile. Each of them alone, yes, but each of them daring to see anyway. That act alone is revolutionary. And here's where the gentle sarcasm sneaks in, because honestly, humanity acts like a stubborn toddler. We scream when someone takes away our toy, the illusion of certainty. We throw tantrums at broccoli, new ideas, and then, a decade later, we proudly announce, "Look what I discovered," as if the visionary hadn't been there all along. You have to laugh at it, or else the frustration will swallow you. But don't forget, you're not just an observer of this pattern, you're part of it. The next time you feel an idea bubbling up that seems too weird, too early, or too much, remember the cycle. Remember that the discomfort you feel isn't proof you're wrong, it's proof you're ahead. Society may not clap yet. They may shrug or laugh or look away. But history's applause has always been on delay. Now picture yourself in the quiet moments of your own life, the half-formed idea you jot down on a napkin, the late-night thought that won't leave you alone, the vision you dismiss before it even breathes. What if that's your Tesla coil, your Enigma machine, your brushstroke that changes the canvas? The difference is whether you choose to silence it or let it live, even if no one else sees it yet. And yes, it's lonely sometimes. Vision is a kind of exile. But solitude doesn't mean emptiness, it means space. Space to imagine, to create, to explore the edges where most people never dare to look. If society ignores you, Perhaps it's because you're standing at the doorway to the future and they haven't caught up yet. Here's a last laugh to hold on to. Imagine the future generations rolling their eyes at us. They didn't take climate change seriously until it was too late. They mocked the idea of artificial intelligence until it ran half their lives. They thought TikTok was revolutionary. Just like we look back at Galileo's persecutors with disbelief, they'll look back at us the same way. It's humbling and a little hilarious to realize we're part of the same stubborn cycle we criticize. So where does that leave you? With a choice. You can belong to the crowd, comfortable, nodding, safe, or you can belong to yourself, carrying clarity, even if it feels heavier. Choosing to see anyway doesn't guarantee applause, but it guarantees something better: honesty, integrity. The quiet knowledge that, like Tesla, like Turing, you refuse to turn away from what was right in front of you. That thought brings us into the final wind down, where the pace slows, the lights dim, and the noise of history fades into a softer hush. Let your breath ease now. You've walked a long road tonight, through centuries of struggle and brilliance, and it's time to let the noise settle into quiet. You've carried the weight of misunderstood minds, the ache of isolation, and the pattern of resistance that seems to weave through every age. But here, in this stillness, you can let it all soften. Imagine lying back, the night pressing gently around you, and above, a sky filled with the same stars Galileo once traced with his telescope. They're still burning, still shining, indifferent to whether they're noticed or ignored. Brilliance, it seems, doesn't depend on recognition. It simply exists, and so can you. You don't need a crowd tonight. You don't need applause. You don't even need answers. All you need is the steady rhythm of your own breath, the gentle pulse of being alive, and the quiet reassurance that clarity, even lonely clarity, is a gift, not a curse. So let go of the weight. Let the stories of Tesla and Turing, of Galileo and Socrates drift into the background, not as burdens, but as lullabies of resilience. You don't have to solve the cycle tonight. You only have to rest, knowing you're part of a lineage of thinkers who dared to see. Before you settle in, feel free to like the video if it brought you a little peace, and if you'd like to join us again, we'd love to have you back. Subscribe when you're ready. No pressure, just rest. Share something if you feel like it. Let's slowly drift into tonight's quiet moments together.